Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Psalm 85, Past, Present, and Future Blessings. We're going to see this in three sections. Verses 1 through 3 give us a remembrance of past forgiveness. And then the center section, verses 4 through 7, give a plea for present restoration. So notice you have the past, the present, and then verses 8 through 13 are an expectation of future blessings. So past, present, future is actually where we're headed. Let's start with the past, chapter 85, verse 1. Of course, like usual, we start with the superscription for the choir director, a psalm of the sons of Korah. And we've mentioned the sons of Korah. There's actually a section beginning with chapter 84 and continuing all the way through the rest of the 80s that are going to take us through this section of the sons of Korah. That's the superscription. Now the psalm itself begins. O Lord, you showed favor to your land. Past tense. This is all going to be past tense. You restored the captivity of Jacob. Now that seems to indicate, okay, Jacob's had some difficulties in the past, and now we're beyond that. Verse 2, you forgave, notice these are all action words, all verbs. You forgave the iniquity of your people. You covered all their sin. And we have a pause, and yet this section is going to continue for one verse. So maybe instead of a pause, it's can I call it a crescendo? um, but this section isn't quite finished with that Selah. Verse 3, you withdrew all your fury. So notice showing favor, restored, forgave, covered, but now withdrew. That indicates maybe there was some fury there before. God's judgment had come, but now it has gone. And this is seen in the last line. You turned away from your burning anger. Notice I put this phrase with a sort of a blue rim around it. That's by design, because the term here is the Cal second person. Second person means I'm speaking to you. You're the one who did the action of the Hebrew verb shuv. And we're going to see this term used a number of times. I won't mention it every time because sometimes it sort of just flows into the psalm. But I will point out a few times where we're going to just see that repetition. So that's verses 1 through 3. I come to verse 4 and I move from the past now to the present with the request, restore us. But again, this is our friend Shuv, and it's the idea, remember that term means to turn, and the idea is turn us. Maybe it's turn back to us, but turn us, O God of our salvation. So uh, God has turned away in the past, and now he's coming back. But also, I think maybe there's this idea of not just that you are turning toward us, but turn us as well toward you. And I often pray this, where I'll say, Lord, I want you to come to me, but cause me to come to you. And if I drift, bring me back. Restore us, O God of our salvation, and cause your indignation, and remember, we already said that was the term shuv, and cause your indignation toward us to cease. Verses 5 and 6 then give four rhetorical questions. Will you be angry with us forever? Question number one. Question number two, will you prolong your anger to all generations? That's really two ways of saying essentially the same thing. The wording is slightly changed, but it's really the same statement. Will you not? Will you not yourself revive us again? And that's our friend Shuv again, although it's excuse me, that wasn't meant to be a pun. But will you not revive us? Sort of the returning is that idea of again. So again, I think the translation is correct. That your people may rejoice in you, and that's sort of a second question or a fourth question actually. So we've had questions for verse 5 and verse 6. Um, and now verse 7, show us your loving kindness, O Lord. Notice how we started in verse 4. It was, O God. Now it's the name of God. And so these services almost bookends, and that's going to maybe suggest to us a pattern. And grant us your salvation. And notice how we began this section and we end it with salvation. There was the term for God, there was the term for Lord. So let's see this same passage, but just to see it laid out in what we call a chiastic order. Here's the same passage, verses 4 through 7. Notice, restore us, O God of our salvation. And we noted that the salvation was there. It's going to end in verse 7 and grant us your salvation as we come to the end. Next, we saw, and cause your indignation toward us to cease or to stop. So notice there's a call to stop. And then at the beginning of verse 7, down below, show us your loving kindness, O Lord. So there was a call to stop and a call to start. And then we had these four, what we call the four rhetorical questions in verses 5 and 6. And the first set of rhetorical questions, will you be angry with us forever? Will you prolong your anger to all generations? Those are asking about negative things. I mean, it's not saying that God's negative, but his anger and is his anger going to continue? We don't want to see that happening, and that the psalmist is asking whether that's going to continue, and he's hoping the answer is no. But then notice the positive in verse 6. Will you not yourself revive us again? So this is a positive thing, that your people may rejoice in you. That would be positive as well. So the layout, now that might not be completely easy to see. That's why I drew it out like this, where you can maybe see it, and maybe I'm making more of it than it is, but it's laid out in this pattern, in this stylized pattern. It doesn't change the meaning of it, by the way. I think it's still the words still mean what they say. It just helps us to see a bit maybe of the poetry behind the psalm. We go from here to verse 8. Now we move to the future. I will hear what God, the Lord, remember the word Lord, that's the in all capital letters, that means it's the name of God. I will hear what God the Lord will say. For he will speak, notice he will say in the first line, he will speak peace to his people, to his godly ones. And so notice what his people are called. They're referred to as his people, but also to his godly ones. But let them, that's speaking of his people and his godly ones, let them not turn back to folly. Verse 9, surely his salvation, and we had a reference to his salvation before. There when it talks about turning back, there's our old friend Shub. So it's not just speaking of turning to the Lord, but in this case, let them not shuv, let them not turn to folly. So shuv can refer to turning to God, or God turning to us, or us turning to a place we shouldn't turn to. In this case, to folly. Verse 9, surely his salvation is near to those who fear. By the way, notice if you want God to turn back to you, and you do, here's the point: don't turn back to sinful folly. Don't turn back to sinful things. A good reminder. Verse 9: surely his salvation is near to those who fear him, that glory may dwell in our land. And so the result of all of this is God's glory. Now remember the term for glory, kabod. Literally, it refers to his weightiness, and that is that I think it's just the idea that you take God seriously, and that his value, his worthiness, is seen, and may it abide, may his presence and the understanding of presence abide in our land. We continue into verse 10. Loving kindness and truth have met together, and there's going to be some very, can I call it graphic? It's very visual, imagining loving kindness, and that's that term hesed. We usually, I like the translation of rendering it is loyalty and truth have met together, and then so they've met righteousness and peace. Not only have they met, notice they've kissed each other. That's a bond that's being made. Loving kindness, truth, righteousness, peace. And then we notice we had truth in the first line. Now we're going to go back to truth again. Truth springs from the earth. So it met, it kissed, it springs, but from the earth. And righteousness, we had righteousness before. Righteousness looks down from heaven. So notice the earth and the heaven. It's, all creation is involved in this picture. I would suggest that all creation is going to be redeemed, having met and kissed and springing out and looking down. It's a delightful journey that these qualities Think about these are qualities that we normally, and now I'm going to get theological for a second. Um, these are qualities that we normally think of as that which God shares or he communicates, his communicable attributes. There are those attributes of God that are not shared. You know, we do not share his infinite, his aspect of being infinite. You and I are not infinite. We did have a beginning. We do not share his quality of being omnipresent. I can only be in one place at one time. Sometimes I wish I could be in a couple, but no, that's not the case. I am not omnipotent. I'm not all powerful. God is those things. But here are things that he shares. So when they meet together, when they kiss, when they spring forth, when they look down, we get to share in that. Verse 12, indeed, the Lord will give what is good. And those things are all good, and our land will yield its produce. So notice the Lord gives what's good, and part of what's good is what the land brings forth, its produce. Verse 13, righteousness will go before him and will make his footsteps into a way. And so here's a picture looking forward when God gives good gifts, both in heaven and on earth, all creation. And at the end, verse 13, righteousness will go before him and will make his footsteps into a way. And think about how the words of Jesus echo that when he tells his disciples, I am the way and the truth and the life. And no one comes to the Father, Jesus says, except by me. Have you come? Have you come to the Father through Jesus? If so, then these qualities of loyalty, loving kindness, and truth, and righteousness and peace, you have been, you have met, you have been kissed by those, and they will spring from you as you see them begin to grow in you, both in heaven and on earth.